Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Blood Red Morning Bulletin. My name is Emmett Gates, and today I'm joined by my fellow Liverpool.com colleague Dave Comerford. And Dave, it's the start of another week, and of course the Jude Bellingham, I wouldn't say a saga, but just the Jude Bellingham speculation continues to rumble and tumble. And reports coming out of Spain over the last couple of days, AS Diario suggested Real Madrid have put together a package worth £124 million for Jude Bellingham to entice him to La Liga. Now, I'm not sure if that's transfer fee plus wages or if it's just wages entirely. I'm not 100% sure, but it's a eye-watering sum of money regardless. Obviously, I think we all kind of know that it's going to basically come down to either Liverpool or Real Madrid in the summer. What do you make of the news? And do you think that we all know on a financial level, Liverpool perhaps really can't, compete with Real Madrid? Obviously, with Real Madrid have a lot of money still left after trying to go for Kylian Mbappe for 2 or 3 years, and then he ends up staying at PSG, so they've kind of money to burn in a sense. Do you think it'll come down to what the player wants as opposed to just purely financial, a financial package put together?
I'd say so. I mean, if we look at the Real Madrid side, it's interesting you talk about that kind of Mbappe part, that money that they put aside for that transfer, which they thought they were kind of destined to get. I think what's interesting from that point of view is, given how Real Madrid work like politically and in terms of their own reputation, they will want now that kind of blockbuster, almost Galactico transfer that they weren't able to get with Mbappe. I guess one interesting footnote on this, or maybe more than that, is there's kind of an expectation that Real Madrid will try and sign Haaland, who has a release clause of €200 million next year. So I don't really know what kind of financial position they're in. I mean, it's Real Madrid, they're one of the clubs who generates the most revenue in world football. Except for Manchester City, of course.
None of it inflated. None of it inflated whatsoever.
Of course, yeah, it's all 100% genuine. But yeah, so you don't know how much that's going to affect things. With Liverpool, for example, I think we had David Lynch on one of these streams was talking about how Liverpool have basically planned for this for years, this Bellingham deal, which indicates that there has been kind of cost cutting for it and money saving. Is that something that Real Madrid have to do in terms of could they sign Bellingham for, you mentioned the package there worth 124 million. And then next year, if they want to sign Haaland for a 200 million transfer fee alone before you even get into wages, is that something that is considered sensible or doable, especially when you consider the young midfielders they already have? So I think that's interesting. And as for the second part, your question about, will it come down to the player? I mean, all the indications we've got in terms of what's been reported from people who've spoken to those around Bellingham is that he's not going to be motivated by money, really. That he wants what the best sporting project will be. And I think, you take that with a pinch of salt in a way, because there's not been many players who kind of come out and say, well, I am just going to go where I'm going to get the highest salary. But you do sense that Bellingham is someone who kind of values the sort of sport. I think maybe the sporting side a little bit more, in terms of his character and stuff. I think he is someone who maybe would, relish a challenge slightly, to be fair. And I think he's spoken a lot as well about the emotional side of football too, which will come into it, I think. So there's plenty of factors at play. Hopefully it doesn't just come down to pure finances, because you'd imagine that even if Liverpool can afford the transfer fee, even if they've saved enough for that, he's not going to be necessarily getting as big a wage here as he would at the Bernabeu or the Etihad. I mean, it'd probably be, I think you've got sort of Van Dijk and Thiago earning kind of roughly 200k, maybe a little bit more. I don't think we'd even be putting him on that kind of level. I think he'd probably be about sort of 180 or something like that, which I think is where kind of players like Firmino and Trent are at the moment. That'd be my sort of prediction on that. So I think if he comes to Liverpool, it would kind of confirm that he's not that bothered about the financial side. But to kind of pose a question to you, Emma, if you were Bellingham, and you had, and Dortmund had said to you, right, we've got 2 identical offers on the table from Liverpool and Real Madrid. Which one do you think you'd lean towards at the moment?
I mean, that's a tricky one because on the one hand, as of we're speaking now, one side is the European champions, and the other side, is Liverpool. The European champions will likely offer more money, but I think a lot of players have a bit of vanity, a bit of ego about them, and Bellingham will probably look at the two teams and think, "Will Liverpool actually need me more than Real Madrid do?" Because Real Madrid they still have Luka Modric, Toni Kroos, um, Camavinga, Tchouameni, you know, Federico Valverde. They have a decent, very good midfield. Whereas Liverpool's, I'm not saying it's falling apart, but it's aging. Like it needs an injection of youth. So I'd say the ego in Bellingham probably thinks Liverpool need me more. I can make more of an impact, more of a presence at Liverpool. And I mean, at the same time, as you said, Liverpool aren't exactly going to offer him, 2 Freddo bars and a £10 note a week to play for Liverpool. They're going to offer him serious money. Um, and he will probably be in the top 5 earners, you'd imagine, if he does sign in the summer. Maybe, he's not the top yet, but considering he's only still a teenager, if he plays well, if he signs for Liverpool, plays well for 2 or 3 years, he could easily become the top earner, even surpassing Mo Salah at a certain point. So I think it all really comes down to a mixture of money and massaging, Bellingham's ego, because all players have egos. So I mean, it is a tricky one. It's like, do you go with the European champions or who need him but don't really need him in a way?
Yeah.
Or do you go with Liverpool who want him, show they've wanted him, and he could make a bigger impact? So yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to assess too. And I think maybe because he's English, maybe he might have that yearning to play in the Premier League now,
Yeah.
perhaps as opposed to, trying to stint in La Liga for a while and then maybe come back to the Premier League. But I mean, he has shown by going to the Bundesliga that he's not afraid to play abroad for, a number of years. So I think it's from the player's perspective, it's difficult. I mean, it's a great situation to have. Either way, he's going to win.
Yeah.
So I think it is a difficult one. Obviously, you put your Liverpool hat on and you think, yeah, hopefully he kind of goes with his head or his heart and not his head.
Yeah.
But I mean, either way, he's still going to get well paid and he's still going to be guaranteed starting minutes. But I think from an ego perspective, he would probably think that Liverpool need him more, so that's where I'll go.
And, just to pick up on what you said there, how many English players have we seen go and play for Real Madrid? I mean, there really aren't that many, certainly in recent history as well.
Yeah, I mean, the last one I think of was Beckham, Jonathan Woodgate, and Michael Owen.
Michael Owen, yeah.
Five.
McManaman as well. But that's, again, you're going back quite a long way for that. So I don't think, based on that Real Madrid, generally speaking, holds the same attraction for English players that it does for kind of, South American players or players in mainland Europe.
Yeah.
I think maybe in terms of what they say is the pinnacle of football is a bit different. I think a lot of English players would rather win the Champions League with a Premier League club and see that as kind of the best achievement, as opposed to, going to Real Madrid. But obviously you can't speak for Bellingham individually, and only he knows kind of what his preferences are, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, like a lot of English, Real Madrid's history isn't really littered with a lot of English players. Well, I think after probably Woodgate and Owen, they were kind of like, yeah, no, we're not banning English players for now 20 years. But it will be interesting to see where the player's head is and what decision he makes. But so we'll move on from Bellingham because we can talk about Bellingham for the next hour. But there's a report that Liverpool are tracking Croatian defender Josko Gvardiol. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The RB Leipzig defender who was one of the best defenders at the 2022 World Cup. And Dave, I know you've written about him recently enough. Do you think he's someone that Liverpool should be looking at? And do you think he would be a good signing? And do Liverpool really need more central defenders? Or do you think that the issues that we've seen this year with Liverpool's defence kind of means that they perhaps do need to sign another central defender?
So on the whether we need defenders. But first of all, I mean, on paper, you go into this season, you think Liverpool have probably got the best centre-back depth of any team. Now you question that a little bit more because, Gomez has been very inconsistent this season. He's been 8, 9 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, to be honest with his displays. And Matip is someone who's kind of been really reliable for years in terms of performances, obviously not availability. This season, he's really struggled, and you wonder if it's kind of injuries taking their toll, and whether he is now kind of exhibiting some signs of being in decline. And if that is the case, you're looking at a player who's got only 1 year left on his contract, then it probably makes sense to sell him this summer, even if you can only get sort of maybe 15 million for him, and then put that money towards a young player who can kind of be that long-term partner for Konate, because it doesn't look like, as much as that I do love Joe Gomez, it doesn't look like he's going to be kind of at that level to be a starter of Liverpool long-term. So that's something that needs to be addressed. Obviously, we know Van Dijk's getting on a little bit at this stage. So maybe the person who comes in wouldn't necessarily be a starter immediately, but will be within kind of a 2 or 3 years maybe. So there is that. And I mean, if you want a kind of young, talented centre-back, then there's probably no better option than Gvardiol. But I suppose, there are a few issues with it in terms of the practicality, the feasibility, because he doesn't have that release clause, won't become active, which I think it's about 97.5 million or something. That isn't active until next summer, which again, you could argue Liverpool need the centre back this year. So even if it would kind of make sense financially to not try and do them both in 1 year, Bellingham and Gvardiol, that is, the window might not be quite right. And also, what I mentioned there in terms of how does that kind of work with Gvardiol coming into a team that already has Van Dijk and Konate, is he going to get enough playing time if he is going to be in the team who drops out, kind of thing. So it doesn't, as much as, there is genuine, there's quite sort of strong links with Gvardiol at this point, it doesn't 100% align for me. And, don't get me wrong, I'd absolutely love it if we signed him, just because, like I say, he is probably the best young centre-back there is. He kind of ticks every box. He's very kind of aggressive when you watch him, which, can sometimes be a little bit of an issue. But again, he's still very young, so he'll probably become slightly more refined. So it is kind of exciting, but my money would be on kind of City or Chelsea really, who really wanted him last summer. And, I've got this seemingly endless pot of money to dip into. City, Chelsea, or kind of a team in Europe to go for him, because I think I said on one of these streams last week that he will be kind of the defensive version of Bellingham in terms of the scramble that he generates among the top clubs in Europe. So that's pretty much how I see that one.
Yeah, as you pointed out, it's an odd one in the sense is that Liverpool probably, you would say based on the back of this season, that they would need new central defenders. But again, as you say, if they splash serious money for a big name defender, there's no guarantee that he's actually going to get regular playing time. So it's probably one of those ones where Liverpool maybe sign a new central defender, but it's more in the 20, 30 million bracket as opposed to 100 million for someone like Gvardiol. Someone that you can, bleed in, and in a couple of years, then he kind of becomes the starting defender, as opposed to you sign someone for that amount of money, you're kind of obliged to throw them in firsthand. But in saying that, I think if you assess all of Liverpool's central defenders this year, they've all had really sticky patches of form. No one has really been consistent. I would say maybe Konate has probably been the most consistent, but in saying that, he's been injury prone this season. But in terms of when he's on the pitch, he's probably performed, I would say, the best. I mean, we saw Van Dijk struggle against Bournemouth on Saturday, and it's not the first time that he struggled as well. And Matip and Gomez, as you pointed out, they've all struggled. But I think, if you're talking an investment of that size, I don't think now is the time. I think obviously this summer's going to be Bellingham. Maybe talking a couple of years down the line, if he's still available, which we probably doubt he will be. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes. But I doubt I think we both agree that it won't be at Liverpool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, you can talk about Liverpool admiring players all you want, really. I think it's a case of, well, of course they admire a player who kind of ticks every box you'd want for the sort of modern centre back. And let's not forget, we know how much the club admired, someone like Mbappe. But
Yeah.
again, it just wasn't feasible because of the finances involved. So you got to be maybe careful to kind of equate sort of admiration for a player with like genuine, serious, transfer planning. So maybe that's the case on this one. But I guess we'll see how it pans out.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And on that very valid point, we'll call it a day here. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and be sure to check out all the content coming up on the website and on the Blood Red channel. And we'll see you all again soon.